Welcome to a Dev Diary. Today we're going to be talking about Tenacity and like the Tenacity line and kind of how it came to be and like why it is the way it is, because I think it's really close to being where we want it to be in the game, but it's missing something, or it's like it's too good, question mark. So where did the Tenacity come from? Where did this term and like the idea come from? So way back before the game was the way it is now, it was called Onslaught, and it didn't have any sort of tenacity. So like you didn't, when you played a card, you just did the thing it said like any other game and you got rid of it. And so it was fine, it was whatever, but it was definitely missing something. Like the game was definitely, I don't want to say boring because that's not the right word. It was lackluster maybe. And so, you know, my son of all people was like, hey, you should get like Meter, like a fighting game. And I was like, you're a genius. You're an absolute genius. So it turned into something called the combo line, which I never liked that name, but it was something I just came up with because I didn't want to use the term Meter or Drive or something like that because other fighting games use that. So what Meter is in fighting games is where like whenever you get hit, you build a little bit of this meter, like a resource. And when you build, when you get hit, when you block attacks, when you do moves yourself, special moves or normal moves or whatever, you build this meter, and then you can spend that meter for different things. So some character or all characters can like use it, a little bit of it, to enhance a special move. So a fireball might become like a faster fireball, a stronger fireball that can now you know, break blocks or something. You know, it could be a lot of things, but essentially you could spend this meter in a bunch of different ways. And one of the big ways you could spend meter in fighting games is you can do your ultimate or your super attack. And the idea is that you build up this meter over the course of a round or two, and then you get to spend it on this ultimate attack that deals a ton of damage. And so the combo line was meant to be that, where you played your attacks and they kind of built up this combo of sorts. Like when one of your characters played, you know, an angry attack, a red attack, and then the next character played a white or a blue attack or something, and you built up this combo line, and then you had, boom, a big old chunk of meter, quote unquote meter, and then you could pop it for a big ultimate attack. And so that's where the idea started. And then I was like, oh man, there's a lot of design space for this combo line. And it was like, you could flip cards in it, you could discard cards from it. And so in the last iteration of Grit, which was called Onslaught, that is where a lot of the ideas started to come from, of like, okay, how can you use this? And then there's a ton of ways to use it, which I'll probably bring back into Grit slowly because it was way too much, way too fast. And so now in Grit, we have a lot more bare bones. I don't want to say bare bones, but like we've toned it down to something that is manageable for new players. Newer players. I wouldn't say new players. I still think the game is quite complex in some ways, but that's for some other time to ramble about. So the combo line then turned into, I hated the name. I always hated the name. So it turned into Tenacity, and Tenacity is now what it's called. And essentially every time you do something, you build your Tenacity, and you can use that Tenacity to parry attacks and use ultimate attacks and do all sorts of things. So now you have the Tenacity, and that's how it came to be. It was nothing, and then it was like a meter system for a fighting game, and it still is that. But now it's more of like, it's like your drive. It's what pushes your characters forward. It's what gives you that extra oomph when you like, you can, you know, kind of like parrying is like blocking an attack with just your brute strength or force, or in some way, you know, you're deflecting the move with your own determination. And so I went through a bunch of different names: Determination, Drive, Grit, even at one point. And Tenacity seems to work. The problem is it doesn't roll off the tongue like Drive. Like, okay, put this into your Momentum. That's something from Universus or UFS, Universal Fighting System. That's another card game. Drive, Momentum, Meter, like all these words were good. They're good, but they're used elsewhere. So we wanted to do something else. And I think Tenacity is good. And I don't think it's used in a ton of other places yet, maybe right now. At least that I've seen in card games. It's used in board games and all of the games and all stuff like that. But for now, it's unique enough and fits the system. Grit is about this story of characters who are using this long-term determination and like internal resolve for them to push through, and it culminates to this fight in the arena. That's the story of Grit. Is they've done all these cool adventures and have built up their strength, and now they're all gonna just duke it out, and whoever has the most determination, the most grit, can win the fight. And that tenacity kind of feeds into that theme, as opposed to like meter, which is very gamey. And it's obviously needs to be a game. You know, when you draw cards, you don't like pump up and that means draw a card, right? Because these things should feel pretty what's the word, like intuitive. So that's why I think stamina, when we played with stamina, that'll be a whole nother thing, but stamina also tried to play with the wording. But for right now, that's what it is. Tenacity is tenacity. So that's how we got tenacity. That's what it is. That's what it means for you to gain tenacity and all that stuff. So what are the problems with tenacity? Well, I actually think the biggest problem with tenacity is that it's too easy to like parry. And it's really less of a impactful choice on your part. So when you play like a 3-cost attack, it doesn't matter what it is, okay? You play a 3-cost attack. You deal a big ol' hit, you force your opponent to have a lot of block, either in hand. Defense cards are really good against those, but the idea is that like they have to block and they have to give up resources to do that. And if that's the case, you've played an attack that has put a ton of pressure on your opponent, and then you get to put that attack in your tenacity, and then that makes it so you have a really great parrying tool, a good blocking tool, right? So that's, to me, is the problem right now, is that the more you're able to cheat out those big cards through card effects, which is like the intention of the game is that you're meant to fill this tenacity in a bunch of different ways. Top of your deck, bottom of your deck, cards from your hand, trigger effects from stamina, all this stuff. But the payoff or what you're giving up doesn't feel that bad often. So it's like, I don't like the idea that you can make a big attack and then immediately have a big defense right after that. Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, especially if it's blocked, right? If the attack is blocked, you would expect, kind of like in a fighting game, that you would almost like you would have to recover. Like, you're like, oh man, like I tried, but nope. You know, I tried to hit you, you blocked my attack, and now it's your turn to go on the offensive. And that doesn't really happen with Grit. With Grit, you make a big attack and you can keep the pressure off of you. And so that's kind of the problem I'm facing right now, is how do you deal with that without adding a bunch of extra rules and all these things, and without nerfing the system that we have now to where like things are unplayable and you have to kind of like start over, because I don't think we're at that point. I don't think the tenacity has that much of a problem that we're at that point, but I think it could be cleaner and not feel as bad when you get hit by a big attack. So one of the ideas I had was, when you place a card in your tenacity, any card from any source, you know, if it says plays it from your hand, when you play a card like a skill, defense, or attack, you put it into your tenacity, right? Anytime you do that, you place it into your tenacity exhausted. So normally it just comes into play, or it doesn't come into play. It goes into the tenacity just face up, and it comes in like prepared. Right now, the orientation of your tenacity doesn't matter, but I feel like that's not a good thing, not a good precedent to set. That in your tenacity, it doesn't matter how your cards are oriented. It should be like they come in, you know, vertically, like ready, as we call it in the Grit rules, and that would be like, that's how they come in. But if they're exhausted, there's a different property to them. They act differently. And so no, we don't have that anywhere in the rules yet. And so I think that if a card is exhausted in your tenacity, it would make sense to me if it was something like it was unusable for like a turn or something. So like when it comes in exhausted, you don't count it towards your tenacity total, so the total cost of your tenacity. And it can't be like, the cost of it is 0. So what this would do in our example of just playing any 3-cost attack is that you would play a 3-cost attack, you would do a big hit, and you would place that card into your tenacity exhausted, regardless of if it hit or if it didn't hit. And then that card would stay that way during your opponent's turn. And now when your opponent attacks, you can't use that 3-cost attack to parry. You can flip it through, maybe a card says, something like a defensive card says, flip 1 card in your Tenacity face down, then prevent 3 damage or something. It doesn't prevent that, but it prevents you from parrying with it. So what this will hopefully do is that it will make it so you basically have a cooldown of cards in your Tenacity that maybe they like every card in your Tenacity like readies itself when you begin your turn. Because one of the other kind of weird feelings of the game right now is that when your turn starts, there's no like signifier, there's no like ping that says, hey, it's my turn, I'm in my turn like headspace. Because in most games, you draw a card right on your turn, you draw a card on your turn, and then that kind of triggers you to say, okay, it's my turn, and you get the feeling that it is your turn. While in Grit, you just say go, and you say, okay, I'm gonna start. And I think that having that trigger really helps the feeling of the game flow, where it's like, okay, it doesn't feel like, oh, yeah, it's my turn. Oh, okay, cool. Like, it's no longer a verbal process, it's now a tactile process. So what this would do is it would kind of divvy up, in a bad way, it would divvy up when you ready cards, because the idea in Grit is that when you rest your character and set out a new active hero, you get to ready all of your cards in play. And so if we were to change that, so you ready all the cards in your play, but then at the beginning of your turn, you ready all of the cards in your Tenacity, you're kind of divvying that process up, which doesn't feel super great, but I think it might be necessary. I don't want it to be that you can keep a character out and ready all of your stuff at the same time every turn, because the point of Grit is that you're rotating through your characters and every character has a chance to shine, and maybe at some specific point one character needs to stay out for a little bit longer to get the value of the cards in their hand or their ability or something, or you've prepared something for it. So I don't want it to be that on the start of your turn all of your stuff readies. I'd be fine if it was just one of, like, you're just your Tenacity. So that's my ideas. That's my thoughts on Tenacity. I think it's very good. I think it hits exactly where it should hit as far as like what it does and the interaction and stuff with it. I didn't even talk about either to like the placement of it. It used to be at the front of your play area and you used to spread out your cards. So it kind of covered the entire front line. So like basically it was like a little defensive area like in front of you that you had. So you could flip cards and your opponent knew them. But we moved it to the back, and I think it helps a little bit more with the layout of everything. It doesn't feel so big, because weirdly enough, this game takes up a lot of space. It takes like a whole playmat, like all of it. So which is cool. I like that. So yeah, that's Tenacity. I don't have any more ideas besides that to quote unquote fix it, or to refine it, maybe is a better way to put it. But you know, I think that's where I got to, is I don't know what else to do with it, so that's where it's at right now. It's fine, but it could be better. And, you know, like always, if you have any ideas, any at all, where you're like, get rid of it, and I'll be like, I'll consider it. You know, it's nothing's out of the picture yet. I can't say it'll, you know, make it in. But I'm really open to ideas right now, because that's kind of how it began, was an idea, once again, from my son, who just said it one time kind of as an offhanded thing, and I was like, that's the best idea I've ever heard. So it takes time to mold those ideas into something cool, but that's what I really love to do. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you made it this far, really thank you so much. Otherwise, if you didn't, you won't even see this, so got 'em. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, weekend, morning, breakfast, lunch, dinner, work day, whatever it is, wherever you are in the world. And I hope to see you in the next video. See ya.